It was a special evening. The restaurant was crowded with friends and family, all gathered to celebrate my husband's birthday. The soft lighting created an intimate and cozy atmosphere, while the music filled the air. I felt relaxed, perhaps a little too much. I had drunk a couple of glasses of wine, and the alcohol was starting to ease my nerves. My father-in-law, Anthony, was sitting on the other side of the table, smiling and chatty as always. He was a charismatic man, with a confidence that sometimes made me uncomfortable. But in a strange way, it was also intriguing. That evening, however, he seemed more affectionate than usual, with his glances lingering on me a bit too long. Every time I met his eyes, a shiver ran down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. Time flew by, filled with laughter and toasts. At one point, my husband got up to talk with some friends, and I found myself sitting next to Anthony. He leaned in with a smile I couldn't quite decipher. "Are you having fun?" he asked, his voice low and deep. "Yes, very much. It's a lovely evening," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "It really is a special night. For various reasons," he added, leaving the sentence hanging. I didn't reply immediately, but I sensed there was something different about him. It wasn't the first time he'd made ambiguous comments to me, but that night, there seemed to be a new intensity between us. The music changed, becoming slower, and a few couples got up to dance. Anthony turned to me and extended his hand. "Will you dance with me?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. I didn't know what to say. I glanced quickly toward my husband, but he was still deep in conversation on the other side of the room. In the end, I accepted. We stood up and moved toward the dance floor. I felt some eyes on us, but I didn't care. Anthony took my hand with a gentleness that surprised me and pulled me toward him. We began to move slowly, our bodies getting closer and closer. "You dance really well," he whispered in my ear, making me shiver. "So do you," I replied, trying to stay calm, but something inside me was melting. Maybe it was the wine, or perhaps it was that electric tension between us, but I felt increasingly drawn to him. It was then that Anthony stepped forward, reducing the distance between our bodies even further. He took me by the waist, pulling me closer to him. I felt his breath on my neck and his body against mine. He gently spun me, positioning himself behind me as we continued moving to the rhythm of the music. At that moment, a surge of excitement hit me unexpectedly. His hands rested on my hips, and the heat of his presence behind me made me tremble. "You look amazing like this," he whispered into my ear, his voice heavy with implication. I didn't reply. My breathing grew shorter as I tried to ignore the confusion rushing through me. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. The way he held me, the way he spoke to me, it was as though he was breaking down every barrier I had put up. The music ended, but the tension between us was far from over. I felt overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. I looked at my husband from a distance, still engaged with his friends, and guilt slowly started creeping into my mind. "I need to go to the bathroom," I said, searching for an excuse to step away from the situation. Anthony gave me an enigmatic smile, then nodded. "Go ahead. I'll join you in a bit." I walked toward the bathroom, my heart pounding wildly. I needed a moment to clear my head, to understand what was happening. But as soon as I closed the door behind me, I heard someone enter right after. I turned around and saw Anthony looking at me intensely. "You shouldn't have come here," I said, but my voice was weak, almost trembling. He stepped closer, narrowing the distance between us. "I couldn't let you go like that," he said, his gaze fixed on mine. That moment stretched out as the tension became unbearable. The walls of the bathroom seemed to close in around me while Anthony drew nearer, and the sound of the party on the other side of the door faded away, as if it belonged to another world. I felt trapped between the desire to push him away and the unspoken urge to draw closer. "Anthony, we can't." "Someone might see us," I whispered, trying to regain some semblance of control, but the tremor in my voice betrayed my hesitation. He chuckled softly, tilting his head slightly. "You know no one will see us. Everyone's distracted, and you're here with me." His hand gently rested on my arm, a touch that should have been innocent, but instead felt like it burned against my skin. I took a step back, leaning against the sink. I needed to pull away, to stop him, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. His presence was so enveloping, his scent so familiar, yet everything felt so wrong. "Don't think about what others might say," he continued, stepping even closer until I felt the warmth of his body against mine. "Let's just think about us." Those words echoed in my mind, about us, as if there truly was an us, as if there was nothing wrong with what was happening. I felt like I was falling into a vortex, drawn to something forbidden, yet irresistibly tempting. I knew I needed to stop him, to find the strength to pull away. But before I could say anything else, I heard the sound of someone knocking on the bathroom door. "Are you in there?" It was a woman's voice, one of my husband's cousins. Panic shot through me. Anthony pulled back instantly, still wearing that same confident look, as if nothing had happened. "I'll be right out," I answered quickly, my voice stronger than I expected. Anthony stepped back, giving me room to breathe. "This isn't over," he said softly, before slipping out through the side door meant for staff. A perfect exit, as if he had planned everything. I stayed there alone for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest and my head spinning. What was happening? I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to calm down, but my eyes betrayed the turmoil within me. I returned to the table, trying to act as though nothing had happened. My husband welcomed me with a distracted smile while chatting with a group of friends, unaware of everything. I sat next to him, avoiding Anthony's gaze, who had settled back into his seat. The dinner went on, glasses were refilled, and laughter multiplied. But inside me, there was a storm. Every time I heard Anthony's voice from afar, or when his gaze met mine for a fleeting second, that tension built up again. "Love, are you okay?" my husband asked, touching my hand gently. "You're quiet." "Yes, I'm fine," I replied with a forced smile. My mind, however, was elsewhere. I thought about what had happened in the bathroom, about Anthony's touch, about the feeling he left on my skin. I wondered how it was possible that everything was happening right under everyone's noses, yet no one noticed. A little later, the music changed, becoming more upbeat, and couples once again filled the dance floor. My husband asked if I wanted to dance, but I politely declined, saying I was tired. I wanted to avoid any physical contact with him at that moment, too confused by everything. Anthony, on the other hand, didn't miss the opportunity. He stood up and invited one of the family friends to dance. I watched him from a distance as he moved with his usual ease. The woman in his arms seemed to be enjoying herself, but then, for a brief moment, he turned toward me and gave me a look that spoke volumes. I knew what it meant. This isn't over. After that dance, the evening seemed to return to normal, or so it appeared. Amid toasts and laughter, I felt like a stranger at my own party. Occasionally, I forced myself to participate in the conversation, to smile at friends' jokes, but inside, there was a constant anxiety. a realization I couldn't ignore. Anthony no longer openly looked at me like before, yet every one of his movements seemed calculated to capture my attention. His hand casually resting on a relative's shoulder, the way he approached the table to grab a glass of wine, always near me even though we didn't speak. It was as if there was an undercurrent, an invisible thread connecting us. I wondered how we had gotten to this point. It wasn't the first time I had noticed his attention, but I had always tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Now, however, I couldn't pretend anymore. His presence made me feel trapped, yet I couldn't stop wanting those moments. At one point, while my husband was deeply engaged in conversation with some friends, Anthony approached me again, this time discreetly, without anyone noticing. He whispered into my ear, his voice calm and assured, "Come outside with me, just for a moment." My mind filled with doubts and conflicting thoughts, but the sound of his words struck me like a call I couldn't resist. I looked at my husband, still oblivious, and made a decision I knew I would regret. I left the room with a simple excuse, saying I needed some fresh air. Anthony followed at a distance without drawing anyone's attention. Once outside, the cool evening air hit my face, giving me a brief sense of relief, but that calm didn't last long. Anthony quickly caught up with me, and within moments we found ourselves alone in the restaurant's courtyard, away from everyone's eyes. The muffled sound of music barely reached us, mingling with the noises of the night. The tension was palpable, the silence heavy. "Why are you doing this?" I finally asked, breaking that oppressive silence. It was a question I could no longer hold back, even though I wasn't sure I truly wanted to hear his answer. He stopped just inches from me, his gaze intense and assured. "Because I know you want this too," he replied without a hint of hesitation. Those words struck me like a truth I didn't want to accept. I felt as though I had been exposed. He was right. Maybe that was the problem, but a part of me was fighting against that thought, struggling to resist the temptation. "We can't," I said, but my voice was weak, lacking conviction. I found myself searching for an escape, but at the same time, I knew that if I truly wanted to leave, I already would have. Anthony smiled, stepping even closer. "It's just a moment. No one has to know." His hand gently cupped my cheek, and the warmth of his touch made me tremble. I closed my eyes as his breath drew nearer. The tension between us had become unbearable, and inside me, reason and desire battled fiercely. But at that moment, I no longer knew which one was winning. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening made me jump. Someone was stepping out of the restaurant, and the noise of approaching voices pulled us back to reality. Anthony stepped back quickly, and I took a step away, my heart pounding in my chest. A group of guests had come outside to smoke a cigarette, and thankfully they hadn't seen us. The adrenaline of the moment made me realize just how close we were to being caught. "I need to go back inside," I said hurriedly, trying to regain control of the situation. Anthony looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but this isn't over," he whispered, before turning and walking to the other side of the courtyard. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath. I knew he was right. This wasn't a closed chapter, but the beginning of something dangerous and forbidden. Despite everything, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. I went back inside the restaurant, trying to maintain a neutral expression, while chaos swirled within me. The soft lights and enveloping music created a tranquil atmosphere, but I knew that calm was only an illusion. My gaze settled on my husband, deeply engaged in an animated conversation with friends, unaware of what was unfolding just a few meters away. I felt as though I was balancing on a thin wire, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about what might happen next. The evening continued, and I tried to avoid eye contact with Anthony, but it was impossible. Each time our eyes met, my heart raced, and I knew that sooner or later something would happen. The tension had become unbearable. Shortly after, the music changed again, transforming into a slow dance. Couples stood up to dance, and my husband took my hand, inviting me to join him. As we danced together, I desperately tried to focus on him, on the warmth of his hands, on his reassuring smile. But then I noticed Anthony watching us from afar. His gaze was piercing, making me feel like I was the only person in the room. I couldn't concentrate on anything else but him. I felt that pull, that magnetic tension dragging me toward a precipice. When the song ended, I found an excuse to slip away again. "I'm going to the bathroom for a moment," I said to my husband with a tired smile. He nodded, suspecting nothing, and I headed for the hallway, trying not to draw attention. Anthony followed immediately, as if he had read my mind. Once again, I found myself in front of the bathroom door, but this time there was no hesitation. When he reached me, no words were exchanged. In an instant, he pushed me inside, closing the door behind us. The bathroom was silent. The only sound was our ragged breathing. I found myself pressed against the wall, Anthony's body against mine. I felt the pressure of his hands on my hips, his warm breath on my neck, and the desire I had tried to suppress erupted in a moment of total surrender. His lips found mine, and I didn't resist. We kissed with an intensity that made me tremble, as if every barrier crumbled in that instant. His hand slid down my body while I clung to him, unable to think of anything else but that moment. Every rational thought, every sense of guilt vanished. It was as if the outside world no longer existed. I felt only his closeness, his desire blending with mine. Our bodies moved in unison, and for a moment, we completely lost track of time and place. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening made me jump. Someone was entering the bathroom, and that sound jolted us back to reality. We pulled apart, our breathing still heavy, and remained silent for a moment, our bodies still close, as if neither of us wanted to break the spell. Anthony looked at me with a satisfied, complicit gaze, while I tried to compose myself, still overwhelmed by emotion. "I'll never forget this," he whispered, sending a shiver through me. I didn't respond, but I knew it wasn't over. That night had changed everything, and there was no turning back. I quickly straightened myself up, trying to appear as normal as possible, and left the bathroom before him, my heart heavy and my mind clouded. I returned to the party, smiling at my husband and trying to ignore the guilt that was beginning to creep in, but a part of me, the part that had given in to temptation, couldn't stop replaying every second of that forbidden moment. I sat back at the table as if nothing had happened, but inside I knew I would never be the same. My husband greeted me with an affectionate smile, as if he hadn't noticed anything unusual. His love felt like a weight on my chest, making every breath harder. The glances, the laughter, the normalcy of the evening continued around me, but it all felt distant, like I was behind a pane of glass, separated from the rest of the world. Anthony returned shortly after, perfectly composed, wearing his mask of the impeccable father-in-law. We exchanged only a fleeting glance, but one filled with meaning no one else could understand. I felt suffocated by that game of appearances, but there was no way out. I was trapped in a web of lies I had woven myself. As the evening continued, I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept returning to that moment in the bathroom. It was as if I had crossed an invisible threshold, and there was no way back. The night passed without further incidents. We returned home, and my mind kept spinning. Every time my husband spoke to me, every gentle gesture he made hurt me more than I could have imagined. The awareness of my betrayal burned inside me, but the desire not to be caught was just as strong. I was trapped in a cycle of guilt and pleasure, and I didn't know how to escape it. In bed, beside him, I tossed and turned for hours, unable to sleep. Anthony's presence in my mind was still vivid, and the thought of what had happened continued to torment me. But what scared me the most was knowing that if the opportunity arose again, I probably wouldn't be able to stop myself. The next day seemed to start like any other. My husband was in a good mood, completely unaware of the emotional storm raging inside me. He kissed me gently before leaving for work, and I had to force a smile, holding back the tears that threatened to surface. Reality didn't take long to make itself felt. Anthony sent me a message, short and simple. "We need to talk." Those 3 words were enough to plunge me back into inner chaos. I had no idea what he wanted, but I knew I couldn't ignore him. We met again, this time far from prying eyes. It was all so absurd. Me, the perfect daughter-in-law, and him, the impeccable father-in-law, caught up in a story I never imagined living. "We can't keep doing this," I told him, but my voice trembled. Anthony looked at me intensely, just as he had the night before. "I know," he replied calmly, "but what happened wasn't a mistake. We wanted it." His words hit me hard. It was the truth I was trying to deny. That night hadn't been an accident, but the result of a desire we had nurtured over time, ignoring every moral boundary. In the end, I decided that would be the last time. I couldn't go on living like this, hiding such heavy secrets. I felt crushed by guilt, unable to look my husband in the eyes without feeling shame. When I returned home, I knew my life would never be the same. I had betrayed the person who loved me most, and nothing could erase what I had done. The guilt would accompany me every day, like a dark shadow I couldn't shake off. Maybe my marriage would survive, maybe it wouldn't. But even if my husband never discovered the truth, I would remain a prisoner of my own mistake, haunted forever by the memory of that night. The story has ended, but if you want to hear more intimate confessions, click on one of the videos you see on the screen, and remember to subscribe to the channel for new intriguing stories every day.